Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to this Virtuoso webinar, how to migrate your Selenium testing, zero risk, zero ramp up, and zero reasons not to attend. That is unless you're watching this on demand, and then there were zero reasons not to register and have it sent out to you afterwards by email. And yes, that does mean that this webinar is being recorded and will be sent through to you very shortly. Also, as housekeeping, please feel free to use that Q&A panel that's somewhere on your screen, on your Zoom bar. We will have a session at the end, but I will be manning that throughout. My name is Ryan Thornton, and as product marketer here at Virtuoso, it is my delight to be taking you through the next 30 minutes. I am aided and abetted by my partner in test. Ladies and gentlemen, bringing an abundance of sales engineering skill, Mr. James Bent.
Hello, everyone. Good to be running this webinar with you, Ryan, and for everybody here. Really looking forward to this one. So, yeah, let's crack on with it.
All right, James, don't milk it. You'll get your turn. I know they're all here for you and not to listen to the marketing guy, but let me at least have my 2 minutes. But with that in mind, let's keep brevity as a close personal friend and jump right in. I will begin by stating that in the pantheon of web test automation, the Selenium set of tools as use-like, they are the de facto in web testing. And they have not got there by not being powerful. Skilled software developers in test and test engineers can do simply amazing things using Selenium. And if you have the time, skill, resources, you can do pretty much anything with Selenium. But just because you can does not mean you should. All that being said, Selenium does come with some common issues. I'm sure these are common to many people. The first thing, it's really not easy. Getting everything set up can be a challenge in and of itself. But you might be an engineer, or you may know or be able to get one to help you. Difficult in this market finding them, but you might be able to, which is fantastic. But there is still a tendency to rely heavily on individual engineers. And when things get scaled, working out what's going on can be difficult. Maintenance is problematic. Sure, you can use IDs instead of XPaths, or select an attribute that is less likely to change. But what if you could get a tool that intelligently identifies all selectors and works out which is best to use for when things change, and then automatically self-heal or self-maintain your regression test pack? End-to-end testing of business applications is not impossible, but it does stretch Selenium beyond what its core functionality was intended to be. And although it's a free open source set of tools, all of these issues means it can become expensive very quickly. And you can spend much of your time fixing tests that may or may not be redundant instead of doing the good stuff, finding bugs. But at the end of the day, you have no choice, because codeless tools don't deliver. Even Selenium IDE is just a stepping stone, right? Well, we're going to say that things have changed. So nearly 2 decades on since its launch, things have changed. But we get it. People have been stung before with the promise of codeless test automation. If you ship your recorder with an IDE, can you really call it codeless? I too, hands up, was skeptical before I came to work here, but I now see that codeless automation has changed because of advances in natural language programming, robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and many other marketing guy buzzwords, but actually the real deal when it comes here. This all means that the goalposts have been moved, and codeless test automation of functional UI and end-to-end tests is now a reality. If you can get a codeless tool that works as well and faster, why wouldn't you use it? And if we can help you migrate your testing to an AI-powered platform and run a pilot to show you the value, why wouldn't you bite our hands off? That's probably because you haven't seen a demo yet. So with that in mind, I will shut up and pass the baton over to Mr. James Bent and let him justify all the bold claims that the marketing guy has made.
Which I think, is probably the job of a sales engineer. Marketing, you do a wonderful job, but really, I think we are here then to show you the platform, to, as you say, Ryan, back that up with a proper show and tell, which I will say exactly the same as you. I agree with Selenium. It's a really, really good framework. But what we'll talk to you today is not just showing you the platform, but also talking about why we are seeing people using Virtuoso, which is going to be a lot around things like the speed at which to create really robust end-to-end tests. We're going to be looking through a number of different areas. So authoring, executing, reporting, and maintaining tests. So things like being able to shift left when you're authoring, using natural language, that anybody can author tests, that they can then execute immediately via plans and CI/CD tools, use robotic test automation, how we'd use element discovery to then ensure that you do build a really robust model of each of the elements being discovered automatically, how you get great reporting from dashboards and a root cause analysis if things go wrong, but also pick up things like performance metrics. And then actually one of the biggest areas that we're going to talk on is maintenance of tests. So self-healing. And we'll show you what we mean when we talk about self-healing to reduce maintenance burden when you've got, let's say, changing IDs or selectors. And then how you can do things like reuse goals or easily fix elements. There's an awful lot we're going to jump right now in and show you. So with that, I'm going to steal the screen from Ryan and let's jump into the platform. So this is Virtuoso. You may have seen from the website, which Ryan has done an amazing job with putting up some nice GIFs and videos to give you an introduction. So building on that, this is Virtuoso. We are a codeless test automation platform. So number one, the scope of what we test is any browser-based application. You can see on screen here, we've got SAP S/4HANA, for example. It doesn't mean that we're an SAP solution. SAP S/4HANA is a browser-based application, just as much as it could be an e-commerce store. It could be Salesforce, ServiceNow. If it's browser-based, you can functionally and integration test it with Virtuoso. As you can see, Virtuoso enables anybody to author tests in plain English. Literally, if I want to click on add to bag, I can just come in and click on add to bag. It's as simple as that. There is literally no setup. You could walk in today and start writing tests. You don't have to design steps or elements. You don't have to define the XPath or IDs. If I want to click on add to bag, I just write the step in this way. Now, I mentioned very quickly shift left. So what we might mean by shift left is that you can start using that codeless means of writing in plain English to then start writing. It can be from, let's say, the design stage, whether it's from BDDs, wireframes, designs. Start writing your steps at the designing stage. So I could come in and say, my requirements tells me that there is going to be a book a demo step. It hasn't been built yet, but still I can write my automation. And even if as then the developers start working on that, they change the label, that's fine. I can easily iterate that and have it ready to run as soon as the code is ready. So that ability to write this, again, with no setup, and in terms of who does this, manual testers, BAs, product owners, as well as technical resources, definitely use Virtuoso. There's just no real sort of entry point or barrier except to say, know the application you need to test, for example. What this also does, though, is to say that even though this is codeless, where I suppose technically there may be some people saying, well, actually, that's still a code because you're still using some syntax. So, yeah, okay, it could, in a sense, be codified. I have to write with click on or write, but it's something that we all are familiar with. You don't have to learn a different language to do this. But it also, in this, you're not limited to just, let's say, clicking or writing. You can be doing things like storing dynamic data. So I could be in Salesforce, creating an opportunity with an ID that's dynamically assigned, which I could store in a parameter. And then I could jump across into another module, let's say my accounts module, and reuse that stored data. You can do all manner of assertions. So I could assert, in this case, that parameter contains some specific text. We have a wide range of assertions that can be performed. But then one of the key things here as well is that you can perform API calls. So we have an API manager to build out your API calls really easily, including being able to import them in. You can map inputs, your authorization, your body, headers if required, map your outputs, test your API call, which in itself isn't really terribly unique, to be honest. However, using that API call, you can now start embedding that into your functional test. So for instance, here I make an API call to grab some user details, which are stored in a parameter, and then I'm going to use those to write in a particular field on screen through making an API call. I could also be doing service level testing. So take an API call to get a token, store that in a parameter, and then pass that into my next API call. So I could do that sequential calls in context of my functional journey. But another key thing here as well is when we talk about tests, we call them journeys because firstly, you can start to write end-to-end flows. And that comes in, and I'll talk about this in a second, about how you can create really robust tests that don't break easily, so you can write those longer flows. What you can do here is these journeys are not limited to single applications. You can have multiple tabs open. I've got Salesforce open. I've got a PDF showing from an e-commerce store. I've got a mailbox showing to pick up an OTP. I can do that all by opening new links in different tabs. So you can have this multi-application testing inclusive of APIs. Again, doing this basically in plain English to be able to create your tests. So what we find here is that we're actually enabling an awful lot of capability that you benefit from in Selenium, including where you have a very specific function, you can extend the platform with JavaScript in what we call extensions. So if you've got a really unique function that is, doesn't make sense for us to put in the codeless platform, you can still extend this and then call that extension in your test to perform that action. So it's really sort of accessible and easily usable, but very powerful, particularly end-to-end testing, integration, functional, to be able to build those tests. Now, in terms of what we're doing, so when you write the tests, great, anybody can do this. You can do it earlier in the SDLC. We find more companies that use our platform are shifting to in-sprint testing because it's easier to create. It's also, you can come in and you can reshare common steps. So I might say, here are my SAP login steps. I write them once, and then I can share them into a separate journey. So instead of having to write that again, I can now benefit from those steps already having been written and reuse them. Now, when we're actually running tests in Virtuoso, if I go ahead and execute this, where bear in mind, you can hook this into your pipelines, so CI/CD tools to be able to trigger and run as you do your releases. You can also do execution plans, so you can schedule when you want to run tests. When these tests are executed, we're launching a headless browser. It's coming from our AWS, so there's no infrastructure for you to support. We're inspecting and basically looking at the site from the front end by bots hitting that site, but then we're looking for the element at the DOM level. So basically where I see I want to look at add to bag, we look at the DOM level, discover it, and automatically populate all the available selectors that are present in the DOM for that step. It works even well here. I could say, and we've got an example here, I've got multiples of the same element. So how come when I'm just writing click on add to bag, how can I get the right one? You can use this look for command, look for comment integration because I want to click the add to bag next to it. Boom, there we go. I provide these relative steps to be able to ensure I pick the correct element. The element discovery in the platform is really, really great. And again, because when we're running the tests, it is looking at the DOM level to discover automatically the element selectors, which could be anything, depending on what's available. We populate that automatically, so you don't need to. We also have running alongside that what we call self-healing. And this is really, really important because it does come down to say, well, what if I'm running in Salesforce and every time I load the page, the ID changes? Because it does, of course, we all know that. Or I change the location, so the XPath updates, or someone changes the class name. Even it could be we're running localized testing, so the label, I might go from English to Spanish. That's where we are using self-healing. And self-healing in Virtuoso means that every time you run the test, where these are all versioned, we are capturing for every step screenshots. So for every run, we're collecting testing evidence. You can also read these really easily. Anybody can validate what was being tested. We're also looking to say, look at the previous working model of the element based on all the selectors. If those have changed, Salesforce, because you've opened the page and the ID is dynamically assigned every time, or maybe someone's moved the location, the XPath changes, could be the class name, the label, it's not limited to any selector. We're then using ML and algorithms to be able to, with confidence, determine if it's still the same element, then self-heal automatically the step to update the selectors and keep the test running. So instead of you having to go in and manually review that or go and see that in Selenium, maybe the XPath changed, the test breaks on line 173, and you've got to go and figure out what happened and then update the new one. Or if you're using IDs, the same thing. The output for you is not to come in and say, well, I've got to go and look at this. You just have to be focused on the fact that your test runs, and sure, you can validate through the screenshots. Yes, it interact with the correct element, and just be knowing that your tests are going to be incredibly robust. That's what also enables shifting away from just doing, let's say, feature-based testing. You can now start coming in and running longer tests to be able to ensure that you can do that sort of end-to-end testing, if you like. Now, what we also have in this is when the tests are executed, we're then having what we call our project activity, where I can review all the outputs from testing. So from a test reporting basis, I can come in and, let's say, filter down when I'm running the tests. I could say, I want to look at a particular goal, the test plan that I want to review. And I could drill in and say, well, let's look at this one. This clearly failed. So let's drill into that. Let's have a look at why. And then we see that, well, hang on a minute, this step failed. I know that I was looking for the comment integration. And I find that was because, hang on a minute, in this case, someone's actually changed the test. It's gone and clicked on the wrong product, for example. If, however, this were determined as a bug, the comment integration was there and we should have been able to click it, we then give access. Firstly, you could bring engineers in and say, well, you can read the test and the context. You can see this was running on Chrome. You can see when it was running, see the screenshots, but you can also see into the root cause analysis to see then details such as the page source. So the DOM at the time the test was run. You can see the page network. So maybe it's a network sort of event that failed to fire. And you also get the page console logs to be able to drill into. So you're getting these sort of highly contextualized insights to really start to drill in and say, in context of a particular journey running, if it's failed, firstly, also, if you're plugging that into your pipelines, you're getting that immediately when you're running this. We also support running tests in parallel. So you could be running 20, 30, 40, 50 plus tests in parallel, bearing in mind you can control that parallelism. You've got this highly scalable means of running automation. So from that sort of authoring, the executing, the reporting, and the maintenance, it's really for us when we are talking to organizations who are using Selenium, finding it's a great framework, except for the fact that either they just can't go fast enough, they can't get in sprint, or they have a maintenance overhead, which means they are looking and seeing for other solutions. We are finding that Virtuoso is something of real interest, and hopefully you are too. What I also want to show to you is we actually have an additional capability, which, for us, we've released in about the last 6 weeks, which we think is a real game changer in terms of automation. And what I'm going to show you is that this is called live authoring. And what live authoring means is that you are able, if you already have features that have been released, then you can do sort of more, whether it's on an exploratory basis, or you're literally coming through and creating tests on new features that have been released. What this does is say that as I write my test steps, you can see I'm not terribly good at writing here, but as I write my test steps, I can immediately have those executed. So you can see here, I've written the test step, it immediately executes in the live browser window. So what I can do by live authoring, if I want to say click on accept cookies, I can say click on accept cookies, great, and that will go ahead and try and look in the DOM, find accept cookies, it just did it, clicked away on the element and perform the interaction. We can check immediately, there are screenshots gathered, so we can see that yes, it did interact with the correct element, but we can see that from the screen. What we've also built into here is live interactions. So if I want to actually, rather than writing, I want to click on book a demo, for example, then I can click on the screen and it will write the test step for me. Fantastic. Even to the extent that if I now want to interact in this box and say, well, I'm going to wait for an element to appear, which gives a dynamic wait time to either wait 20 seconds or for June to appear, you'll see that also automatically populated the iframe, which I didn't know was there. It could be nested iframes. We're testing on things like SharePoint, for example, which has a massive number of iframes. We can automatically identify those. So having this sort of real blended approach to be able to author tests, whether it's through writing steps, so click on 23, or whether it's going through with those interactions. So maybe then I want to, let's store the meeting time into a parameter, which then I might just want to assert that meeting time contains UTC, for example. I can start really creating my tests at the pace at which I'm writing them, seeing that as I write them, they then execute, knowing that means I've got working automation. You can literally see the speed at which you can create these tests and have them knowing that they are working, where we see that when people come on board to the platform, even for BAs, and I shouldn't say even for, but for a BA or a manual tester, a non-technical resource, they are writing tests on the first day, where we provide great support and guidance and documentation to ensure they succeed. People are, though, very successful. So it's just a real sort of indication here, including if I do things like embedding API calls, for example, then I could make a call to return user details. Let's call this response, actually. So in real time, I can be making my API call, which returns the response into this. I'm doing this all in real time and knowing, again, that my automation is working. So again, as Ryan and I have said, we acknowledge that Selenium is a fantastic framework. It really is. It's very, very powerful. There will be some cases where, for instance, we don't do desktop functional testing. We don't do native apps, and that's not within the sphere of us. So it's an example of how there are some things which they're not at the moment in scope of our platform. However, where we find that people are engaged within browser-based testing, whether it's e-commerce stores, whether it's a business system, whether it's digital transformation projects of multiple browser-based applications with integrations, even through to things like being able to test with synthetic data or data, test data. So within the platform, you can set up test data tables. So have parameterized data sets that you could upload from a CSV file, create your parameters, which then you can put into your tests. Or indeed, you could be generating synthetic data. So if I just come back and see the example here, let's say you just want to be able to create sort of first names and last names, which are basically generic data, then you can generate that synthetic data rather than having to maintain it. These sorts of things are the things that make Virtuo so incredibly powerful, but at speed. And while we're definitely not here to say, engineers don't have a place in this, because they do. The engineers are probably focusing now on more things like setting up different environments, maintaining and thinking about how data is set up, how integrations should be run, thinking more about the validity of the test and the testing environments, as opposed to having to think about how do I create my automation and maintain it. You can now sort of free up yourself to say, actually, we can have a lot more people involved to scale testing at speed and get involved in doing a lot more of the sort of the complex, more valid things around testing, as again, opposed to just sort of thinking, how do I maintain my framework? So hopefully through this, we've given some really great insights. I will say another sort of great capability we have is the ability to do what we call visual regression testing, where as you run your functional or your end-to-end with integration tests, you can be also capturing what we call snapshots. So basically, as you run the functional tests, snapshot each page in a checkpoint. When you have sort of your ideal state set up, you can snapshot and create a baseline. And then you can also say, when you do your next release, go ahead and re-snapshot and have Virtuoso compare on a visual basis to say if there are changes, then give you a visual representation of that in terms of where the changes have occurred. So being able to extend, where obviously this is an e-commerce store, but this can work well for things like reporting. So if you have given inputs, say given data inputs for a business system or a reporting system, that means a dashboard should show a certain way. If given those same inputs, it looks differently, then that may mean there's been an unintended regression. This isn't just about, let's say, checking, in this case, for a sofa picture has changed. It's highly extendable. But hopefully we've given you sort of a really good flavor of the platform, and building on the fact that now we have a mass of customers that have come on board, and a very good number, of course, that have been using Selenium, but who have been looking to basically do things like speed their testing, scale, and make it more robust and scalable. These are the sorts of things we have been showing you that are the things that are basically responding to those prospects and customers to use Virtuoso. So bearing in mind that as per usual, I like to talk an awful lot and left all of about 2 or 3 minutes. I'm sure there will be some questions which we will most certainly be very pleased to take from you. So Ryan, that's probably your cue to say,
absolutely,
have you had any dropped into the box that we can answer?
So we've got about 5 or 6 already in. I've tried my best to answer them in the Q&A. But in the meantime, as I alluded to earlier, we are looking at being able to usher my children out of the room. Sorry about that. We are looking to migrate testing from Selenium and get our customer success team on board to do that for you. So as I say, 0 risk, 0 ramp up. What's not to lose? With that in mind, I'm going to launch a poll to see if anybody would like to be given priority for a personalized demo. So that poll is launched there. If you would like to take advantage and be prioritized, then please do click yes. I'll leave that open for a little while longer. And let's have a look at, we've got a comment here. Visual regression is a great feature. Yeah. And there's a good blog post. It's not time for me to go into this now because I know there are some things you can do. I can't remember the exact code, but to kind of have a visual regression check done. But I'm not sure it has the baseline, but there is, check it out on the website around visual regression and how we've moved things along. How do we get the license to explore the tool's features? Well, one surefire way is to click yes on the do you want a demo poll. And let's go back to some of the older questions. So we had one around sleep or weights, and how we kind of maintain weights. I don't know if you covered it because I was busy typing, but how do we deal with kind of elements loading and having to make sure they're on screen?
Yeah, it's great. So we have these dynamic weights where, for instance, you can say wait for, I don't know, it could be add to basket. That will convert to a dynamic wait 20 seconds, or for dynamic basket, you can adjust those wait times. So basically it's saying that you could code this for your slowest environment. So if it takes a minute in the slowest environment, you could say wait 60 seconds for add to bag. If in your UAT or your product loads in 2 seconds, the test will move on in 2 seconds. So having those dynamic waits means that you're not having to sort of code in for the longest test and have the test really slow. They will run at the speed of the applications. So that's a really neat capability that we have, albeit we're investigating and say, actually, can we get rid of wait times altogether and just autonomously do that for you? But right now, it's a great capability to ensure tests run at the speed of the environments.
Desktop, native mobile, and cross-browser.
Yeah, so we're focused on functionally testing browser-based applications. So we don't functionally test desktop or functionally test on native apps. You can interact, of course, from an API level or data level with desktop apps. There is, if let's say you had a small portion, you had to go and, I don't know, run a very limited number of steps in a desktop app, then that can be facilitated by typically an API call to run a service to go and perform those steps. If, however, you're running an environment that's got a very large portion of desktop that needs to be done, then at this stage, in terms of functional testing rather, then at this stage, we are focused on browser-based apps. For native apps, you can export the tests and run them through and basically have them run for native if it is the same kind of functionality. which again is sort of how actually we can facilitate things like accessibility testing through OWASP, performance testing through JMeter, because you can export the tests into a usable format. But to be very clear, and we've chosen this scope for functional testing, it is browser-based applications.
Okay, and I think it's going to have to be the last one, and it's going to be for me, and it's around pricing and people wanting to be able to share that with colleagues, which I fully understand, and we're working on that. If you do get in contact, we will be able to share a one-pager almost immediately for you on that, but I don't have contact details obviously through Zoom, but if you just, drop us a line on either the website or whichever way you like, I can certainly share that with you, and we're working towards getting that more readily available for everybody. So it is for whom the bell tolls now, as we come to the end, and it's just time for me to say, do not procrastinate, just migrate. Get in contact, virtuoso.qa. I'd like to thank everybody for coming and sitting through our dulcet tones. I know that it is a very competitive webinar market at the moment. And thank you to Mr. James Bent for that sales engineering experience.
And thank you, Ryan, for your marketing and comparing experience as well. Always a pleasure.
Never a chore. So it is bye-bye from him, and it's bye-bye from me. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.